Space has often been defined as humanity's final frontier, and credit is where credit's due. Outer space is one of the only truly unchangeable forces of the universe, just out of our species' true grasp. Its vastness, its mystique, its otherwise harsh environments make it the most bewildering thing in existence. It has been a topic of numerous works of fiction, myths, legends, tales, and stories of old. It can seem estranged to us, intangible even. But we often forget that there is another thing not too different from this old one. It's a lot closer. In fact, it's right here on Earth. Introducing Antarctica. Now, if you're educated, you're probably already familiar with Antarctica. Physically, Antarctica and the universe are both two very, very distinct entities. One's a chunky block of ice bigger than the United States, and Florida, traps over three-quarters of the world's freshwater supply. And most of all, it's a landmass and not the vacuum of existence. Yet when we compare Antarctica as something to inhabit, to conquer even, something like space, the similarities start becoming apparent. As both are explored, these similarities will show themselves as opportunities to cross gaps between our understanding of our species. And our perception of these two things could even redirect our future progression as a whole. Now, for the purpose of this video, we'll be focusing on Antarctica only. But let's not forget, the way outer space will influence our perception of Antarctica as something to establish ourselves upon, will absolutely influence our understanding of the universe and ourselves. Just as a fair warning though, this video will involve alternate history, or alternate future in this case, so don't get me in the comments for not knowing XYZ or something like that. Because frankly, this video's entire purpose is speculation about the future. With that being said, we must first understand a very brief history of Antarctica for context. Antarctica, or Terra Australis, as it was known at the time, was first discovered in January 1820 by European explorers, the most notable one being Russian Baltic German descent Naval Admiral Fabian Gottlieb Benjamin von Bellingshausen, or this guy. Later in 1899, Karsten Borchgrevink established the first research station. Later than that, in January 1911, Norwegian Roald Amundsen was the first man to reach the South Pole, and survive. Even later in 1938, American Admiral Richard E. Byrd decided it'd be a splendid idea to spend a few months in the Antarctic, almost dying in the process and fueling conspiracy theories for decades to come. Then in 1943, the last territorial claim was made to Antarctica by Argentina, now known as Argentine Antarctica. Today, Antarctica has over 70 permanent research stations, but has no current plans for permanent settlement. In the last 204 years and counting since discovery, our progress has been slow, to say the least. Right now, in 2024, we just don't have the proper tech to combat the continent's conditions. The continuous below freezing weather of -30 to -80 degrees Fahrenheit is simply too much for us to even worry about dealing with at the moment, considering the focus should be placed elsewhere. The only precursors of permanence are, of course, the research stations. And that's it. Not a very promising start to colonize the continent. As new technology develops, however, the very idea of an established civilization living on this will almost certainly become an increasingly sought-over endeavor for nations. A mini arms race, if you will. Emphasis on many, though, because it'd be pretty hard to find a lot of Antarctic enthusiasts who would want to live basically indoors most of the time because it's dangerous to even go outside for more than a few hours, and there's no natural plant life or food. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? Well, if we want to start living on Antarctica, then first we need to know how to survive there, let alone create functioning societies or countries. We also need to know how to survive there without harming the rest of the planet. Although, considering how fast technology is growing at the moment, there should be new ways to sustain better life without heating up the continent. Within the next 80 years, our technology will be greatly improved upon, naturally, and will eventually have found a way to generate heat more efficiently to be used on much grander scales without consuming as much power. Also, to implement and distribute stronger materials, because the weather here can get a little out of hand. To involve ourselves in the ultimate future of this video, by 2061, scientists began experimenting with new technology to generate heat 3 times more efficiently, allowing heat conductors to be used on much larger scales. Antarctica is a perfect test for this. Scientists all over the world began the Antarctic program to conduct research and to establish living on Antarctica, in Antarctica, along with public interest fueling fundraising for the project and energy efficient heat. By 2063, the experiments turned out successful, and subsequently global interest in colonizing Antarctica to create permanent settlements skyrocketed. And not long after, the Winter Arms Race was born. With that covered, the discussion for the countries to inhabit the South Pole land begins. Luckily, because there are already territorial claims made by Argentina, Chile, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, Norway, France, and the likelihood of the Antarctic Treaty revision, the issue about land is already solved, besides the unclaimed territory. We'll get to that later. But for now, let's focus on these guys. We'll start with this. Looks empty, right? Here's the respective territories. If you click on this video to actually see countries in Antarctica, there's going to be some complications to that. But we already have workarounds with these pre-established territories. Of course, the Antarctic Treaty will most likely change 80 years from now, but considering it wouldn't really matter to a country or multiple countries to fight over near uninhabitable territory, at the very least, these land borders will likely stay. And to emphasize a bit further, these territories could actually become countries, or their father countries could change, but we'll stick with these 7 countries for this video's sake. You see, if we want these pieces of land right here to be quote-unquote countries, well, they can't exactly because their sovereignty is already under their respective father countries, and they don't have any native populations either. But they can have more independence than being a state or province because they're so far away from their countries, and are more importantly territories. Greenland is a territory of the Kingdom of Denmark, which means that Denmark will always have true power over Greenland, assuming that doesn't change, but Greenland will still be able to function like its own little mini-country. Not to a very high extent, I might add, but still. This fundamental paradigm coincides with every single territory of Antarctica. And these territories' governments will also function the exact same way as any territorial government would, and similarly to their father country. Over time, these territories may even eventually gain complete independence from their father countries, although this can easily be disputed. So, now it's time for speculative, futurative theorizing. If we go back to here, we can see a few new artisan-crafted flags for the year 2100. These flags will most likely change with time, and so will their names. For instance, look at Australia Antarctica. It's a lot of land, but a lot of land needs a shorter name. We'll use Onsalia, which is simply an easy combination of the previous name. All these territories will have capital cities as well. So for Australia, it would be Willem, named after the first person to discover Australia, with a population of 4.7 million people. Its most populous city is Antarctica, with 8.3 million residents, and Australia has no official languages either, similarly to Australia. Australia's total population by 2100 is 36.7 million people, and its gross domestic product is $7.3 trillion. For Norway's portion, or Queen Maud-land, this name will stick because it can be abbreviated as QML. Established states of power always need recognizable names or abbreviations. Even the Democratic Republic of the Congo can be abbreviated as the DRC, and therefore is a recognizable abbreviation as a result. QML's capital and most populous cities are Fortrop and Heavenscale, with the former at 1.3 million people and the latter at 8.6 million. Queen Maud-land's official language is Norwegian. Its GDP is $9.8 trillion, and total population is 23.6 million people. For Britain's portion, or simply called the British Antarctic Territory, this is by no means a good name for a more independent land. This one was more difficult to come up with, but I chose Cookwood, named after James Cook, who is a quite famous British figure in Antarctica's history. You can see it for him on your own if you'd like to. Then we've got Chilean Antarctic Territory, which is the same case as Cookwood. This was also relatively difficult to come up with, but I decided on Stading, named after another Chilean explorer. And as for Argentina, wait a minute. What are all these overlapping territorial claims? This isn't any way to go about a video like this. Instead, the United Kingdom, Chile, and Argentina decided upon a tridominantly shared land called the Commonwealth of Antarctica, or the COA for short. This newly formed area acts as an entirely new country, and each of those three countries form a government system similarly to a representative democracy, with Chile as one body, Argentina as another, and the UK as the third body of their government. The COA has no official languages by decree to represent their equity. Its capital and largest cities are Azle at 5.3 million people and Faraday at 10.6 million people. Its GDP, using the Antarctican currency, which will also be used by another country in a minute, by 2100 is $4.7 trillion, and their total population is 41.8 million people. Now we move on to French Antarctica, or Adélie land. This one's name actually stays the same, as it has a nice ring to it. Its capital city is Carloman, named after the French monarch, with a population of 1.3 million, and its most populous city is Palais-Julie, with a population of 5.5 million people. Adélie-land's official language is French, its total population by 2100 is 9.8 million, and its GDP is $3.2 trillion, since it's kind of rich. For Peter the First Island, occupied by Norway, this one is going to remain as the same name, since it's so small. Its capital city is Utgard at 450,000 people, and its most populous city is Gnard at 1.1 million people. Its official language is Norwegian. Its GDP by 2100 is $521 billion, and its total population is 1.9 million. Moving on to New Zealand's portion, or the Ross Dependency, NZ will decide upon a one-word name, but for the sake of this video, we'll call it Zarland, an easy fit. Zarland's capital and most populous cities are Tasman, named after the first man to discover New Zealand, at 2.7 million people, and its most populous being Kingville at 3.8 million. Zarland's official languages are English and New Zealand's native language, Maori. Its GDP by 2100 is $1.7 trillion, and total population is 13.6 million people. Last but not least, there is Marie Birdland, or the unclaimed territory. Several countries down the line, including the big three, United States, China, and Russia, will argue over this one. Some minor conflicts will naturally arise because we're humans, but eventually enough, the United States, Russia, China, Brazil, Indonesia, and India agree upon forming an essentially entirely new, almost universal country. It's called Concordia, or the Republic of Concord, which is a country name I've once said for years, by the way. Concordia acts as a sort of universal leading land of Antarctica, like the US with North America and Brazil with South America. Its government system, uniquely, does not involve any parties, and individuals are elected by their competence and wisdom for 6-year terms to run in a council of 6 people, without more than 2 terms. Since it includes all of the world's biggest powers, it plays a huge role in the global economy and is a popular destination for tourists visiting Antarctica. Its capital and most populous city is Mirador at 14.7 million people, and its second most populous city is Emeralds at 6.2 million people. It has no official languages like the Commonwealth of Antarctica to represent its ethnic diversity and varying cultural backgrounds, although English is either the first or second language of 70% of its citizens and the main language spoken by the council. Its total population by 2100 is 73.8 million people, making it the most populous land of all of Antarctica, and its GDP will be $18.6 trillion using the Antarctic currency. By its complete formation, Concordia displayed a great sign of unification amongst the great powers. Who else would have ever seen something of this magnitude? And that is the final product. As long as humans are around, colonization will always be constant. When it comes to Antarctica, it's still a constant. I'm sure that our descendants down the line would find great interest in living comfortably in such a seemingly inhospitable environment, supported by technology that we may never get to enjoy. The techniques that we'll use to develop ourselves in Antarctica, outer space, both will directly influence the other and ultimately our understanding of just about everything. Imagine the discoveries lying dormant on something as secretive as Antarctica or something as hostile as Venus. Discoveries that could resolve so many conflicts, answer life's greatest questions, conclude conspiracies, or leave us more baffled than satisfied. One thing is for certain, however, the only way to uncover this great treasure trove of knowledge is to advance ourselves for the future. But hey, that's just a theory, a geography theory. Thanks for watching.